Today is going to be section 10-3, and we're going to be looking at parallel and perpendicular lines. So today's objective, you guys are going to be able to find the parallel and perpendicular equations from another equation and a point. So I know that in geometry we talked about what parallel and perpendicular, so I'm hoping that we understand what the meanings are, but understand that when we use this phrase parallel, what we're doing is we're comparing the rates of change between two lines, and we're saying that they are the same. And so by definition, two lines are parallel if and only if their slopes are equal. So let's take a look at these little 5 examples here. Let's see which ones give us which of these lines are parallel. So I need to examine the slopes on all of them. So if I minus 3x here, I get negative 2y equals negative 3x plus 11. Divide everything by negative 2. I get y equals 3 halves x minus 11 halves. So my m is 3 halves. For my next one, minus 5x on both sides, I get 4y equals negative 5x plus 10. Divide everything by 4. I get y equals negative 5/4 x plus 5 over 2. Well, this one's negative 5/4. That's not so far. I don't know what it is. This m, that is 3 halves. This m is 5, and this one is 5/4 right here. So the only ones that have parallel lines are going to be A and C. Those are the only two that are going to have these parallel lines. And the reason being is because the slopes are going to be the same. Now, this positive 5/4 and this negative 5/4, those aren't going to be the same. And so, because they're not the same, that's why I have this negative 5/4 and the positive 5/4. Now, when we have perpendicular lines, the definition is going to be two non-vertical lines are perpendicular if and only if their slopes are negative reciprocals of one another. So, if my slope is negative 2/7, using this phrase negative reciprocal, well, if it starts at negative 2/7, apply a negative, so it becomes positive 2/7. Reciprocal means I flip it, and so that's how I get this 7 over 2. And so we can denote this perpendicular slope by saying that it's 7 over 2, like so. So let's look at the first example here. It says, find the equation of the line in point slope form passing through negative 3,7 and parallel to the line given below. So I need to know a point and a slope. I have to know what that is. To create an equation, I have to have this point and I have to have a slope. But it has to be a parallel slope. So my original slope is going to be negative 5. Well, since the parallel slope, by definition, we said it's the same slope, that means the parallel slope is also going to be negative 5. And so that's going to be the slope that I use to be able to create my equation. And so now I can do y minus y1 equals my m times x minus x1. And it says write it in point slope form. That's point slope form, and so that's going to be my answer. So the first step, I identify the slope. I said my slope is going to be negative 5. And so write the parallel and or perpendicular versions, whatever is asked. And so because it asked for the parallel version, I wrote down the parallel version. And so now I used that parallel version and the point to be able to create the equation. Now just know if it asked for the slope-intercept or the standard form, then I would have to take this equation and do ... and manipulate it to all those other forms. Example number 2, it says find the equation of the line in point slope form passing through 3, 1 and perpendicular to this following line here. So I need to identify the slope. I can't look at the slope in this. There's no m in this equation. So if I put it into y equals mx plus b form, I would be able to get that slope. So I'm going to do that here. Divide everything by negative 2. And so I get y equals 2x minus 11 halves. So my slope is going to be 2. So now step 2, write the parallel or perpendicular versions. It says perpendicular, and by definition we said perpendicular is negative reciprocal. So negative reciprocal. So my perpendicular slope is going to be negative 1/2. So that's going to be my perpendicular slope. So now use the slope and the point to create the desired equation. So it's going to be y minus y1 equals my m times x minus x1. And that's the point slope form that it's asking, and so I am done. For this next one here, my m, that's going to be 2. Just know that in this case it's asking for parallel, so if it's saying write the parallel and perpendicular versions, then I'm going to say my parallel slope is going to be 2. So now being able to write it, y minus y1 equals my m times x minus x1. Hey, look at that. It's the same. No problem. And for this last one, first step, identify the slope, so I have to get y by itself. So I get 3y equals negative 7x plus 1, divide everything by 3. So my slope is going to be negative 7/3. Now for the perpendicular slope, that's going to be negative reciprocal, so my perpendicular slope, I have to add a negative and then flip it. So that's going to be positive 3/7. And so now I'm going to use this slope and the point, y minus y1 equals my m times x minus x1. And so that is going to be my equation. Now we can also find the parallel and perpendicular lines when it comes to slopes being 0 and undefined slope. So for this one it says find the equation of a line passing through the following points that is parallel to the given line. So if I add 4 to both sides, I know this is going to be equation y equals 4. So let's visualize this. It's going to be this line here, and I have this point, -2, +1. So if I'm going to draw in my parallel slope and get an equation for that, that's going to be y equals 1. My next one, if I subtract 3 on both sides, I get x equals 8. And so if this is 8, it's going to be a vertical line that does this. And so if I have this point 0, 5, 0, 5, it's also going to be a line that goes straight up and down. And it's going to be x equals 0. So when it's parallel, if we're talking about the y, we're going to use the y. If we're talking about the x, we're going to use the x. When it comes to perpendicular, we know that this is y equals 4 and this is x equals 8. Well, let's take a look at this. If I draw this out, we said 1, 2, 3, 4, so I have this line here. So if I have 5, -6 as my point, 5, -6, so I have this point out in space, well, perpendicular, it's going to do this, because it has to create that 90 degrees. And so now that has become x equals 5. And so when it's perpendicular, you're going to use the opposite. So if we're talking about the y, we're going to use the x. And so for this one, because we're talking about the x, we're going to use the y. So that might be a shortcut to help remember. But like I said, drawing it out like I did here, always, always, always the most optimal way of doing this. Now let's look at another problem here. And the only reason why I wanted to add this problem here is just because we can take it and we can analyze it in the terms of point slope. So it says you get a job delivering pizzas at a local pizza shop where you get paid $10 an hour plus a bonus at the beginning of the day. After working 4 hours, you are paid $52. Determine the equation of the line that represents how much money you get paid each day. So with this information, getting paid $10 an hour, that's technically my slope, because for each hour that passes, I get $10. And so I can say that my slope is going to be 10. Then the other piece, it says after working 4 hours, I get paid $52. That's a point. I have 452. So now that I have a slope and a point, I can write it into this point slope form to create an equation that represents that. And so y minus 52 equals 10 times x minus 4. And so now I know after how many hours that I plug in, I have this equation that will show me how much I'm going to get paid based upon the number of hours. To close today's lesson, what did we learn today? Well, we took a look at perpendicular and parallel concepts, and then from that concept we decided we could find a line that is both perpendicular and parallel to another line through another point. So I want to hear back from you guys. How do I find the perpendicular slope? And what are the three different equations of a line again? I need to be reminded. Thanks, guys. If you have any other questions, please leave them in the comments.